Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Rory Zoerb today. Rory's an individual that reached out to me that has quite an interesting background. And Rory, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, good. Thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks for having me.
So you provided me with Rory. You've been in this for a long time. You've got stuff on your list that is some really intense stuff. And take us back to the beginning, Rory, when you first started getting involved with Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and it's been a journey. It started in about 92 when I started thinking about it seriously. I heard about it, like everybody else, pretty much throughout my life. And in 92, I dove into, I think, about 5 books. And I can't remember the names of them, but I'm sure most people have read them, and all about Bigfoot. And after reading the 5 books, I was convinced that these beings exist, and in fairly large numbers. So I had an opportunity, I had the time to put together an adventure, and I was prior military, so putting on a backpack and hiking for long distances was fairly normal to me. So I put together a backpack. It ended up being about 100 pounds. It was a military large Alice pack, and I had 100 feet of military rappelling rope on it, tent, bedroll, 30-day food supply, which was about 30 pounds. So it was about 1 pound of food per day, including, energy bar, protein bar, and oatmeal, and, quick dinners I could just boil up, that kind of stuff. But it was a pretty heavy pack. And I didn't want to drive. I wanted to go into this expedition quietly and just walk through the woods in the area that I thought that the Sasquatches would likely be. And I actually originally planned on a 90-mile route, which, over 30 days it's not bad at all. It's a stroll. So instead of taking a car, I took the Amtrak up the coast and then into Redding. And it was interesting when I got on the Amtrak, they had stewardesses back then. This was in 93. And my backpack got a lot of interest from the stewardesses. And they asked me what I was doing, and I told them I'm going to look for Bigfoot. And they all thought that was quite funny. So anyway, I took the Amtrak up to Redding, and then I caught a bus. It doesn't run anymore, but it was kind of a famous little bus line that went from Redding over to Eureka, I think it was, or somewhere over on the coast. But anyway, it went through Willow Creek. So I took that, got off at Willow Creek, stayed at the Bigfoot Motel for one night, and checked out the Bigfoot cage in the back and all that. And I didn't really talk to many people in town at that point, not that I can remember. Of course, this is like 30 some years ago now. But so the next morning, after staying at the Bigfoot Motel, I just headed out with my backpack, and I'm pretty sure I went northeast out of town. I don't remember exactly. All I do remember is the first part of the journey was steady uphill for quite a while. So around dusk, I was pretty smoked from carrying that pack uphill all day. And there was a pull-out area on the side of the road. And so I dropped my backpack, pulled out the 30-pound bag of food, and I remember I had some fruit, some dried fruit stuff. I was really looking forward to that. So I pulled out a few things I was going to eat, and I hear this sound coming through the trees. And it's starting to get a little dusk, and I'm kind of straining to see across the road on the uphill side. And I'm straining to see what is making this noise, and it's getting closer, and it's big. And then a bear comes out of the edge of the woods and is standing on the other side of the road, and I got my food is like strewn out at my feet. And I looked down the right, looked up to the left, turned around behind me. There's nowhere I'm going to go. And besides, I don't want to let him have my food. So I started talking in about 5 different voices, high, low, deep, whatever, yell, and just get the bear to go away. And I remember him cocking his head kind of like a dog does, and he just kind of casually turned and walked away. So I was like, wow, this is going to be an interesting hike. So I got something to eat and repacked everything and continued up until it was dark. And I found a place to set up my tent, and I was really smoked by this point. I mean, carrying that, it was all uphill. And so I set up my tent, and I thought, well, I should hang my food, but I was too tired. It was too dark. So I dragged my backpack about 35, 40 feet from my tent and just left it sitting on the ground. So I go back to my tent, and, I just found this really interesting. Hopefully your listeners will find this interesting too. If you want to go backpacking in the wilderness, especially up in the Six Rivers National Forest, it's full of bear and mountain lion. So anyway, I set my backpack down, and I'm in my tent. I'm getting ready to crash out, and I'm actually horizontal at this point. And then I hear my backpack being dragged. And I'm like, oh no. I mean, I can't lose my food on the first day into this journey. So my defense, I didn't bring any firearm. I brought a hammock that I cut the ends off so I could use it like a throw net, and a K-bar knife, and a little thing of pepper spray I wore on my forearm. So with those 3 things, I was pretty confident I could deal with anything that, came at me or whatever. So I go out to get my backpack, and I just yelled, "Hey!" As my backpack is being dragged into the bushes, and I couldn't see what was dragging it. It was really dark, and as soon as I yelled, I hear this. So it was a mountain lion dragging my backpack off, and so I continued over to my backpack. I could hear from where he scowled at me. He was away from my backpack. He'd retreated into the bushes and trees. And so I don't remember what I did with my backpack after that, but that was it for the night. But that was pretty much enough for one day. So anyway, I continued on in the journey, and while I'm talking about bear, I had over 100 bear sightings and encounters, some of them very close. There's so many bear up there. I saw 7 bear in 1 hour at one point, and I had a total of 5 mountain lion encounters, a couple of them really close. So anyway, I continued on my journey, and I meet this guy that lived he was like off grid. I didn't see his cabin. I think he was in his pickup, and he stopped when he saw me hiking on the road, and we had a conversation. And I told him I'm looking for. At this point now, I'm just talking to everybody about Bigfoot. I mean, I'm talking to the locals, and I said, you ever hear anything, see anything? He said, yeah. He said, I used to have one that came through my property about the same time every year for a few years. And, I'm like, whoa. And so he starts telling me about, at one point, they kind of had a bond that started to grow. And he said at one point, he tossed a ball that he had in his yard to it, and it tossed it back. And this guy just sounded, as matter of fact, like he's just absolutely telling me the truth, what happened. But I thought that was pretty astonishing. And talking to him further, he said, I'm in the kind of the right general area, but the area I really wanted to go to was west of where I am, right now. And he described the location, and what he was talking about was Bluff Creek. So I changed plans. I was like, wow, I'm planning on going 90 miles into an area that, may or may not, but Bluff Creek sounds like it has a lot better chance. So, and at some point, I don't remember when it was. I probably did a total of 5-6 expeditions up into this area of Northern California. And it was either on this one or another one. I don't remember, but somebody had told me to check out the fish hatchery. There's been sightings around the fish hatchery for years. And so I think it was on my route that I was hiking. So I spent some time looking around the fish hatchery for any sign. And I did find a human barefoot, but it was extraordinarily wide, and it was short. It was definitely a juvenile, but it was weirdly wide. And I measured the width of it with the handle of my K-bar, and it was the width of my K-bar handle. And I don't remember how long the track was. I think it was 8, 9, 10 inches, something like that. It just wasn't big, but it was just wide. So who knows? I don't know. But anyway, so I made my way over to Bluff Creek. I went back into town and then headed up to Bluff Creek. And I got to Bluff Creek campground when, after exploring the map, that looked like my best entrance. I used to have those roads memorized. I think it was 13N or something and now they call it the Bluff Creek Trail. But it was right kind of across from the Bluff Creek campground. And so I got to the Bluff Creek campground, and by the time I got there, I figured I'm just going to spend the night there and camp out. And I spoke with the owner when I checked in, and he came out. He's real friendly, talkative, and I sent you a picture of the Bluff Creek Company as I remember it back then. I think I just Googled and found that old picture of it. But in the picture, you see the porch on the Bluff Creek Company building. And that porch is where he and I stood and talked, leaning over the railing. And so, I asked him, I said, so you're here, what do you hear about Bigfoot? He said, oh my gosh. He said, it was crazy back in the day. And he started telling me about how the media, flocked in there at some point. I don't remember. I think the attraction was there was a woman who claimed that she had been abducted, and she came out of the woods and she was all scratched up, and the National Enquirer was there. He said it was a circus, and it unfolded pretty much right in front of his business there, the Bluff Creek campground, and that was very interesting. And I said, well, what about, you ever see or hear anything? He said, well, they used to come through the mountains behind me here every year about the same time. And I think he said February. And he'd hear them for about 2 weeks screaming back and forth to each other as they migrated through the mountains. And then they would just disappear and he wouldn't hear them anymore. And I was like, wow. I said, can you describe, what the scream sounded like? And without even missing a beat, he let out his rendition of a Bigfoot scream. And I'm sure my jaw fell open, but I was like, wow. And he said, but, they stopped about 10 years back. He said he hadn't heard them in the last 10 years or so. And, but he said, you come to the right place. He said, this Bluff Creek area, there's been sightings, going back a long time. So, and he had his general store then. And I asked him about it. He said, I asked him, could you, show me the inside? And he said, sure. And we went over and he unlocked the door. And when I walked in, it was like he had just locked the door one day and never opened it again. It was fully stocked with so much memorabilia, mugs, shot glasses, just everything, the whole thing, but it was all covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked like it'd been sitting a long time. And he was pretty unhappy, when I talked about him with what had happened. He had a couple of gas pumps out in front of that Bluff Creek Company store, and the regulators came in and imposed some regulations on his gas pumps, which meant he would have to spend thousands of dollars to reline the tanks and all that stuff. And he couldn't do it. and he was really upset about it. He had to shut it down. And I've kind of wondered, over the years, if they didn't do that on purpose to make him less of an attraction because they really don't want people going in there, I don't believe, and exploring the whole Bigfoot thing. And I'll go into that a little bit more down the road. But anyway, he was pretty disgruntled about that. But anyway, so it was great talking to him. Nice guy. And I think he had a brother then, too. I'm pretty sure he's since passed away. But anyway, the next morning, I headed up what they now call the Bluff Creek Trail. And it went west and followed basically along the left side of Bluff Creek up higher. And so I'm hiking up, and I have an idea of where I want to go. And this is one of the interesting mountain lion encounters. This is all uphill for quite a ways. Anybody who's taken that Bluff Creek Trail knows there's a lot of uphill in the beginning. But there was a big tree on the right-hand side of the road, and it had a couple of branches still growing out. It was all debarked and old, but it had like a perfect notch to set my backpack down and for me to sit down in and relax, for a minute. So I'm sitting there, and I had my 35 millimeter camera on the outside of my backpack in a big protective case, and in case I needed to get to it quick. So I set my backpack down, and I'm sitting there relaxing, and it's just quiet and beautiful day, and I hear something coming through the brush on the other side of the logging road, and it's coming towards me. And so I stand up. I'm getting ready. I did carry a steel bar, and later it was too heavy. I later exchanged it for a walking stick, a sharpened walking stick. But anyway, I stood there ready for whatever was coming through the trees, because it was like it was making a beeline right towards me. And I see this buck pop out of the woods on the high side of the road on the left side. Big, beautiful, racked buck. And it looks down at me. It's like, almost standing above me. And it kind of made a snort and then bolted to the right down the road to my left. And so I said, oh, okay, well, that's what was making the noise. No big deal. And so I sit back down, and then I hear noise from the same area again. And so I stand back up, and out pops a mountain lion. The buck was running from a mountain lion. So the mountain lion jumps down the bank. It now has me in its sights. And it comes down the bank, and it gets to the middle of the logging road, and I think it was probably about 40 feet away, and we're just facing each other. And he wasn't moving. He didn't know what he was going to do. I didn't know what he was going to do. But anyway, I thought, wow, I've got a little time. I reached back without turning away from him. I reached back and grabbed my camera out of its case, and I pulled it up and snapped a picture of him standing there, looking at me. And I have no idea where that picture went. 35 millimeter. It's in a shoebox somewhere. But anyway, he, after a couple of minutes of just looking at each other, neither of us was going to, make any move towards each other or back away. until he finally decided to go stage left, and he just walked off the road and down into the woods. But I just thought that was an interesting encounter. But the next one that's, happened later is more interesting. But anyway, so I'll keep going. I kept hiking up Bluff Creek Trail, and there was a fork in the road, and I thought, well, I'm going to take this down. This looks like a great area to go down to Bluff Creek. And there's an open area at the bottom of this switchback. I forget, it's about half a mile, maybe a mile with all the switchbacks down to Bluff Creek. And so I take that down, and I think I set up camp on the way down because it was a really big open area. And it's in one of the pictures that I sent you. It looked like it was an old logging camp that they had cleared out. And it was a really good place to set up a camp. Good place for a campfire. Trees were like, nowhere around. It was a big open area. And so I'm pretty sure I set up my tent and just got ready. That was where I was going to camp for the night. But then I headed down, or I went down the next morning. I think I went down that afternoon. But anyway, I go down to Bluff Creek, and I'm looking around and just looking for any kind of sign, tracks, always looking for tracks. And at this point, I had seen tracks that were very interesting. One of them, it looked like it was around a bowl. But, in the forest floor, you rarely get a place that will hold a good track. It's all the junk that falls on the forest floor. But you can see some big impressions, especially in moss. Moss can hold a really good, nice outlined track. So anyway, I'm looking around Bluff Creek, and I start seeing these trees, these spruce, and I think they were spruce, maybe some pines, but the tops were broken off, and the top was lying down next to the tree. I mean, I saw 3 or 4 in a row, and I was like, that is so strange. So, and the tops of the trees were still green. They had not been off of that tree for very long. They hadn't had a chance to dry out. And so I examined the trees, and I looked for, it was, it's a bear maybe chewing the tops of the trees off, but there were no teeth marks. And there were twists. These things were twisted. And I was like, no, that's a hand that did that. And I was like, I don't think people are doing this. But it definitely looks like a hand with a strong grip, especially a tree that's, 1 inch in diameter at the top. You try and grab a 1 inch diameter tree and twist it and break it off and drop it down next to the tree. You got to have some pretty powerful hands. And some were thicker than that. And I sent you a picture of one tree break that was about 2 inches in diameter. Absolutely, I cannot figure out how anything other than an extremely large, powerful hand could bend it and break it. And when I got the sample break, it was a green, healthy tree. The power it took to do that it's astonishing. But anyway, so I'm finding these breaks, and then I did find impressions, large impressions. Now, bear and squatches, they occupy the same territory. So, I'm sure there's times where you can look at it and go, oh, that could be a squatch, or it could be a bear. But, you know, on a side note, any of the time that I spent down in this area of Bluff Creek, I never saw a bear. And I had seen, like I said, I stopped counting bear at 100, literally. I was seeing so many bear. I saw them all over the place, but I never saw any in this area of Bluff Creek, which I didn't think about too much at the time, but later thought it was kind of odd. So I'm finding the impression in these twisted trees, and some of them were bigger twists and higher, higher off the ground. And I would look on the tree to see, did something climb up this tree to get to the top? Because a bear can't reach that high with his mouth. And there was no damage to the limbs going up the tree. Absolutely, completely pristine, as though something reached across and grabbed the top, twisted it, broke it off, and dropped it right next to the tree. That's the signature break that I was finding. So I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And so anyway, I head back to my camp, back up the switchback, and I get to my camp, and I think I made dinner, and then I started exploring around my camp, and there was a trail that went north out of my camp, and I walked down that trail, and I found two more trees right next to each other with the same signature twist off, with the tops lying right next to them. And I examined these closely, and there was sap in one of them, and the sap had trapped hair. So I cut this section of the twist off and put it in a baggie with the sap, a little piece of the tree, and the hair. And so to fast forward, when I got back, I told my father about my little adventure, and he's like, "Oh, come on, Rory, Bigfoot hunting? Are you serious?" And I said, "Dad, I got hair samples. I think I'd like to have them checked out." And he said, "Well, you know what?" He said, my dad was a sheriff at the time. He said, I got a buddy who's a retired FBI forensic hair specialist. He said, "Why don't you send me the samples, and I'll have him check them out." And I'm sure he wanted to come back and tell me, "Rory, you're wasting your time. Those were whatever." And like 3 weeks later, he called me up with a really surprised tone in his voice. He said, he doesn't know what they are. He said he doesn't have a match in any of the hair samples he's collected over his entire career. And he asked where I got them. So he was interested in where I got the hair samples. So my dad was like now he had an interest in what I was doing. So anyway, so I camped out that night, and finding the twist-offs in close proximity to where my camp was, this is when I thought to myself, I think I'm right in Bigfoot's backyard. And that was my goal, was to put myself in Bigfoot's backyard. And from what I had read in the books, they're very curious about campfires. I'm sure for a couple of reasons. Any animal that sees a fire in the woods, they need to know whether they need to leave or if it's not a big deal. So my plan was to set up a big campfire and attract, a Sasquatch to me. And because there's no way I'm going to chase one down or track one or follow one or any of that kind of nonsense. So, and like I said, this was an old logging camp, and there was cut off stumps and stuff all over the place. It was like left and had been sitting there for many years. I mean, you picked up a log, it felt like a giant roll of paper. And, you know, and on the story that I wrote, I said I collected about 2 cords of wood. Well, now I live in Colorado, and I know what 2 cords of wood is now. But back then, it wasn't 2 cords of wood, but it was a lot of wood because it was laying all over the place. So I spent the evening collecting this huge pile of wood and set it lengthwise along the side of my campfire. So my plan was, and like I said, I'm in a big open area, so I felt, you know, comfortable in making a large fire. And I did it. I got that thing, you know, going pretty good, and to the point where it would illuminate, you know, high up on the trees that were around this open area. And so I'm keeping the fire going, and you know, like I said in my story that I wrote, and it was on Matt Moneymaker's BFRO website when he launched that back in 1995. I think he called it Mission to Bluff Creek, and that story on the homepage of his website, I think, got an awful lot of attention and word spread because I got some phone calls and things about it. But anyway, so in that story, I had put, you know, I was sharpening my walking stick, which I noticed was now much larger than the one I started with. And so I was sharpening that and keeping the fire going, you know, constantly looking up and down, you know, being ex-military, you think in terms of likely avenue of approach. You know, if something's going to come towards you, there's going to be likely avenues that they'll take to get to you. So I'm looking up and down the likely avenues of approach, which is basically north and south. And it was getting after midnight, and I'm thinking, you know, I don't know, if something doesn't happen pretty soon, I'm just going to get a good night's sleep and head back down to the creek in the morning. And I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, still sharpening the stick, looking left, looking right. And I looked up to my left and looked square into a pair of nocturnal eyes. And there was the funny thing about this, there was no, you know, second or two to think like, what's that? It was instantaneous. I knew that one was standing, and I paced it off the next morning. I think it was 65, 70 feet from me. And the intelligent curiosity that it stared at me with is like no other animal that I've ever experienced out there. And the eyes were well off the ground because I knew my campsite pretty well at that night. I'd been sitting around it for hours, and I knew these eyes are off the ground. And it looked to be standing behind about a 9-foot tree that I knew was right there because I passed it coming into my camp. And so we stared at each other. It stayed directly focused on me, and I think it had to have been about 10 minutes. It was a long time. Nocturnal eyes. And they shifted from side to side as though he was rocking back and forth from one leg to the other, and one eye would kind of, disappear for a second, like he is behind that bush, and then it would, come back out. And I watched this, and so long that my neck was crooked to the side. I didn't want to turn away from him. I didn't know what was going to happen. So, like, the first thing that happened, when I saw his eyes, is I knew immediately what it was, and the hair on my back lifted my shirt. I wore a flannel shirt, and it lifted it off of my back, and I felt that, and I remember, like, whoa, that I've never had that kind of reaction ever, and it was so strong, and my next real thought was, after feeling that happen, was, I hope no one has ever shot at this animal. I hope he doesn't have any ill will towards human beings, because he's only got to close about 70 feet. There's nothing I can do. And this walking stick and this pepper spray and this throw net and this K-bar knife are not going to do, anything. So we stared at each other, and as we stared at each other longer, I started getting really comfortable and getting, this feeling that this is just an intelligent, curious being, and he means no harm to me, and I think he knows I mean no harm to him. So after minutes, his eyes and my eyes started getting sore. I'm staring at him, and his eyes started getting harder to see, and I realized that I hadn't paid attention to the campfire, and that wood burned so quick I had to keep stoking it. And so now I was so completely comfortable with him standing there watching me, I turned my back to him, took 2 steps to the wood pile, grabbed a big old log and brought it over and put it back on the fire, and whew, that old wood just lit right up, and I couldn't see him anymore. He was gone. So, and in that time, I wanted to see his body. I wanted more confirmation. As much as I knew what stood there for 10 minutes and stared at me like no other animal. Now, I could see a mountain lion doing that, but, it's a smaller set of eyes lower to the ground. There was nothing for a mountain lion to get off the ground there. It was kind of a sparse little 9-foot, growth, whatever it was, and nothing that would support a mountain lion. So, and while this staring thing went on, I raised my left hand. At first I didn't feel comfortable raising anything. But at one point I got comfortable enough to raise my left hand, and I put his eyes underneath my thumb, and I could see that a lone pine tree just came above the edge at the top of my hand. So basically his eyes were a hand width below this single tall pine. And I'm like, okay, I got my bearings. I know exactly where he is. I know exactly how high his eyes are off the ground tomorrow morning when I size this all up. And I thought about, after he left, I thought about going and looking for tracks, with a flashlight. But it's really hard seeing tracks in grass and forest floor and all that, especially at night with a flashlight. It just doesn't have any three-dimensional perspective. So I sat there the rest of the night, and I stayed up, very excited, and I thought he came back. I thought I saw his eyes, but further back up the logging road, because he had walked in on a logging road up to my campsite. He didn't come through the brush. And so I think he went back out the same way he came, and I swore I could see his eyes again, but further back. So I thought, he'd come back to see if I'm still here, what I'm up to. So the next morning, the sun comes up, and I wait until I got really good light, and I don't want to disturb anything and go over there and mess anything up. But I go over to the logging road, and I could see on the sides of the logging roads up there, there's this grass that grows like a foot tall. And I could see perfect, I think they were about 18 inches long by 7 inches wide, perfect human shape, no toes, just a big flattened step behind that tree that I knew he was standing behind. And I could see that it looked like he had been shuffling around there because his prints were just, all on top of each other. And it basically was just like a shuffled area. And I was like, he walked in right here. He nice and quiet, walked right down this logging road, right on the side of it, through this grass, up to this tree, and stood behind it and watched me for 10 minutes. And so I go back to my, campsite. It was either before or after, I don't remember. And I put my hand up to that lone pine and looked to see where his eyes were on the bottom edge of my thumb, and it was at the top of that tree. And it all added up to him standing there and standing behind it and shifting back and forth and that. And I was like, wow, I was pretty stoked. So I had, the hair sample, and I did take pictures of the grass where the tracks were, but it's just, it doesn't come out worth anything. It's not even worth anything. So, and I don't know what happened to those. But anyway, so I'm like, well, I could hang out here and, see if I can get another encounter. But I was actually pretty excited to get back and, kind of, I don't know, I was ready to go. And not that I was really, afraid of anything, but I felt like that was a pretty good experience. So I packed up everything, and I had I think it's about 16 miles to get back to Bluff Creek campground, and that was going to be my goal. And a lot of it was uphill. And so I wanted to get back to Bluff Creek campground. So I headed out, and I'm walking up the logging road out of my camp, the same logging road that I believe he had walked in on. And I'm only about 75 feet up the logging road, and all hell breaks loose in the brush to my left. And it is huge. Whatever it is huge. So those Alice packs have quick releases on the shoulder straps, and I hit the quick releases to dump the pack and grab the pepper spray. And, before I could even get the pepper spray out, I could tell it was going away from me. And it was making an amazing amount of noise. And it wasn't going around trees. It sounded like it was going through trees. I mean, the brakes were, it was, whatever it was extremely powerful. And it was very fast. and it was crashing through the woods away from me. And I tried to listen to, in the forest floor, and it sounded bipedal. It didn't sound quadrupedal. But, everything happened really fast. And, but it definitely sounded like he laid up there the whole night, and he actually had a vantage to my campsite from where he would have been laying to lie there the whole night and watch me. And I surprised him by heading straight out of my camp the next morning and walking right towards him, and he just bolted. And I could hear him run down the mountainside, and he was covering a lot of ground really fast. And then I could hear him get down to the bottom and then start going up the other side of this little valley, this like ravine. And actually it's really huge ravine, more like a little valley. And I was like, whoa, adrenaline rush. And so that was it. I put my backpack on and then headed back to Bluff Creek Campground. And the thing that's weird about this, and I know a lot of people, talk about ESP and, other things. One thing that I did get when I was looking at him is a real sense of, there's no worry here. Looking at him, it was just an intelligent, curious, and I got a sense of loneliness. I don't know why. It's maybe in my head. I don't know. But anyway, so I make it back to Bluff Creek Campground, and I'm taking a shower, and I'm pretty amped up. And I'll never forget this. I'm just scrubbing my hair and my face, and I was doing it so vigorously, I jammed my little finger into my eye socket, covered in soap. And I'll never forget that. But anyway, the thing that I was thinking while I was in the shower is I don't want to tell anybody where this happened. I didn't want to tell anybody where he was. And I thought, that is absolutely strange. You put all this time and effort and planning into going and doing this and hoping to have an experience, but then you don't want to tell anybody really about it or where it happened. Specifically where it happened. I didn't want people going in there. And so I kept it to myself for a long time. And but now I've shared it because I a whole bunch of people can go in there and they can take care of themselves. But anyway, so let's see. I'm going down my my list here of things I was going to try and remember. Oh, well, so I've made a number of visits to that particular area of Bluff Creek, and it's a beautiful area. It's really wide open in this one section. I don't know of any other sections like it. And I didn't realize it at the time, but there's a feeder creek that feeds into Bluff Creek right there, and it's called Bigfoot Creek. 2 words, not 1 word. Bigfoot Creek. And so I thought, well, it got its name years ago, possibly for a reason. And the other thing I thought, and I'm pretty sure, I used to get a map every year. I went up there, a forestry map, and I could swear one year they did not have Bigfoot Creek as the name of that creek, and then another year they did, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, so let's see. Any questions, or are you there?
Yes. The gentleman who was looking at your hair, was that Dr. Fehrenbach?
He was the second person I sent hair samples to.
Okay.
And he sent me a letter back, which I have no idea where it is, that he said he did not know what it was, and he talked about the inner medulla or whatever, but he did not come back and say it was a this or a that. Inconclusive. Which I thought was very interesting. And I later seen him in TV shows talking about a hair sample that he had received around the same time that I had submitted my hair samples. And he said those are the ones he used to test all other Bigfoot hair samples against.
Right. So
now I don't know if it was mine.
Here's what I'm thinking, because I've seen those too, like those old 90s docs that he's in, like the Henry Franzoni one, and then he's talking about the gold standard hair. If I was to guess, it sounds like that was probably your hair, is the gold standard Fehrenbach hair.
I think it was, because the timing is right.
Right. That's wild.
And and I did this before, Bigfoot hunting was, at least as far as I know.
Right.
When I said I went looking for Bigfoot, everybody was like, how ridiculous. Now you say that and everybody's like, how cool.
Yeah, it's a little different
but
now.
Anyway,
right?
back then, I think, I sent it to him and he's like, whoa, what's this? Guy sends me some hair, thinking it might be a Bigfoot. And so anyway, he sent me the letter back, and I was, really satisfied with the letter that, he didn't say it was a Bigfoot hair, but he didn't say it was any other kind of hair.
Right.
And he said it had some similarities to human hair, but it wasn't human hair. So, and if I remember correctly, it was, a bit wavy and, not short, not real long.
Yeah.
But anyway, I also gave some hair to Peter Gattia.
Oh, sure.
I gave out all my stuff. It's like, I'm not one to keep stuff. I don't know why. I just want to have the experience and, to get proof. So I didn't keep a lot of stuff. So I gave Peter Gattia some, and he was kind of surprised. I just gave them to him. And those were some in a baggie too, I think, with some twist off tree and sap.
Wow.
But, back when I got back to Southern California, I met with Danny Perez.
Yep.
And, we met at a restaurant. And then I forget who it was. It was either Danny Perez or Peter Gattia said that there's this guy who wanted to talk to me about what I found up there. And so we met at a restaurant. And he said his name's Carl, and he said he's former CIA. And I'm like, well, okay, you just come right out and say it. And I think at that time he was flying for the Forestry Service, but he said he was former CIA, and he was interested in what I had found, and I told him all about it. And I started telling this story to people so many times. That's why I typed up my original story. Friends and family would ask me about it, and I recited the same stuff over and over. So I decided to just type it up and hand it out when somebody asked me. And that's how, I think I contacted Matt Moneymaker and told him I had this write-up, and he said, send it to me. So I sent it to him. He said, oh my gosh, can I put this on my website? So I said, sure, and he put it on the home. And back then, the BFR website was like, I don't know, it was like almost brand new. It was like a couple of pages.
Did you have any dealings with Peter Byrne at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I forget what year it was, because I went up in 93, 94, 95, 96. Matt Moneymaker and I went up there. I took him to that campsite and showed him the whole, where it happened, where it stood, the whole 9 yards. And we drove up together. Matt and I were buddies for a while when I lived in Laguna Beach. On one of my trips, I came back through Oregon and stopped in at the Bigfoot Research Project with Peter Byrne, and he had a couple of other people that he was working with, a lady and a guy. I used to know their names, but I was a database of
one of them, Franzoni.
No, I don't think so.
No, okay.
But the lady, she did all the office stuff, and the younger guy, gosh, I used to know their names right off the top of my head. But anyway, I was a database developer for years, and I carried my laptop around with me, and they had some old way of managing their contacts and phone numbers and conversations and stuff. So I developed a database, a contact database for the Bigfoot Research Project while I was there hanging out with him. And Peter and I drove around in his, I forget, it was almost, I think it was a small car. But we drove around and did stuff and talked a little bit. And I trying to convince Peter, I know where they are. I know there's a place that has a really high likelihood of successful contact. And I couldn't get any of them. And I think he had a $500,000 grant at the time. I couldn't get him to, be interested in that location. So I hung out with him for a while. I forget how long. Long enough to develop a little database for him. And so I met Peter Byrne. And so, in 94, I went back and, so I'm starting to get the years mixed up. But anyway, I spent a lot of time with Al and Mark Hodgson, two really great people. I mean, they were just, Mark let me sleep in the fire station when I was in town, when I wasn't out looking. I don't know if I should say that. But anyway, everybody was fine with it. Yeah, everybody was fine with it. So I hung out with, Al and Mark. At that time, Jay Rowland used to be sitting around the outdoor eatery table, and I sat with him a couple of times, and we would just talk about, and he liked talking to me. I think because he knew I was like really going out in the woods and spending a lot of time. So he figured, this guy's not just whatever. So he took the time to spend a lot of time talking to me, and I, really interesting guy, had a lot of old knowledge. So I forget what year it was. It might have been 94. So I go back up there, and Al contacts John Green. So he says, hey, there's this guy down here. He says he's finding stuff. And of course that's John Green's, that's his neck of the woods. I mean, that I'm pretty sure it struck a chord with him. So anyway, Al got John Green and Bob Titmus to come down, and we all went to the location that I've been telling you about, that big open area down by Bluff Creek. And we went down there, and I showed him the tree breaks, and I showed him, tracks, and it could have been bear trail, I definitely have seen some Bigfoot tracks, but what I showed him that day, I'm not sure about. But he was not impressed. So, and maybe rightly so. But anyway, Bob Titmus took a real liking to me because Bob Titmus is an old bush guy. He's really into the field stuff, and he sensed that that's what I was into. And back then I was chewing Red Man, and Bob Titmus was, I think he was chewing Skull, and we sat on a log next to each other, and we definitely hit it off. So we spent a little time there, and John says, okay, well, how about we take you to the Patterson-Gimlin film site? I said, nah, not really interested in going up there. That's ancient history. I'm more interested in what's going on here right now.
Okay.
And I don't think.
Hold on.
I don't think.
So
I don't think that went over well with John.
This is John Green.
Yeah, and yeah, John Green and Al said, let's go to the we'll show you where it is. And I was like, no, I'm not really interested. I think Bob Titmus had a little smirk on his face.
At what year was this again? 90s?
94, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're like, so you're hanging out with dudes that were like the ones that were seeing tracks in Bluff Creek, like back in the 60s, like Jay Rowland, Al Hodgson, Titmus, like all those guys. That's incredible.
Yeah. And I spoke to the granddaughter of the logger who found the 50-gallon drums full tossed over the side.
Jerry Crew. Would that be Jerry?
I think there were a couple of guys. He's the most famous.
Yeah, right.
But I don't remember her name, but she was the granddaughter. She said, my grandfather told me about the barrels. And so, this is a family member reciting what was told by their family member. I talked to a lot of interesting people. I talked to a woman in her late 80s who had owned a couple of businesses in Willow Creek. And, I went to I think it was a 4th of July, and every, word in town was, this guy's hunting Bigfoot. And people would come up to me. And this lady came up to me and she said, back around the turn of the century, she said, when she was a little girl, she remembered hearing stories of the trash being raided by these things. And also that women weren't allowed to go to the river by themselves. And I mean, this is just, you're talking to a very intelligent, she's still very sharp, very matter-of-factly telling me that, it's been going on for years. And, the more you talk to the locals, it's common knowledge.
I also jumped right in the middle of your John Green story, which is terrible. So how did that go?
No, that's good. No, that's good. Well, I never saw John Green again.
Okay.
Or Bob Titmus. And, around that time, before I went back up there, I had called and spoke to Renee DeHinden, Grover Krantz. Those were phone calls.
Yeah.
And I also called around to, major universities across the country. And they laughed at me. Bigfoot, I'm like, this is science. There's a preponderance of evidence. There's a huge amount of evidence and eyewitness testimony that these beings exist. You guys are scientists. You should want to investigate. And they just all laughed it off. But, it was some interesting conversations.
What kind of things did you talk to Renee DeHinden about?
I think the same thing as everybody else, that
Okay.
there's this area in Bluff Creek that I found, and this is the experience that I had, and about the tree breaks. And I don't remember, but that's just what I was talking to everybody about.
Oh, wow.
I was pretty much reciting the same thing over and over.
Right,
Hey,
right.
I think I know there's a place. And so where we're talking about, when you look at the pictures I sent you, is right next to that little creek that feeds into Bluff Creek. It's called Bigfoot Creek. And I didn't discover that name until after my first expedition, which I was like, whoa. So anyway, and in later times, so I visited that place again, and that's where I had my third mountain lion encounter. I was down in the flats. I brought my breakfast down by the river and started a little campfire. And I brought a little day pack down there and made my breakfast down there. I mean, it's just beautiful. I mean, what an adventure. It's just gorgeous. And so I'm making my oatmeal and I'm stirring it and I'm facing towards Bluff Creek. And I'm kind of like in a sumo squat over my pot, and I'm stirring the boiling oatmeal. And for whatever reason, I got the notion to turn around, and I kind of swiveled on the balls of my feet, and I turn around and I'm looking at a mountain lion that is about 20 feet away from me, just emerging from the brush. And if I'd have waited, a few seconds longer, he'd have been on my back. So as I face him, I slowly start standing up, and I wore that throw net, that hammock throw net on my left front belt. And I unsnapped, I think it was in a hand grenade holder, a military hand grenade holder. And so I pull out the throw net, I unsnap the K-bar, and I have the K-bar knife in my right hand and the throw net in my left hand. And the idea came to me, when I visited my mom, she had cats, and I would play with them by stalking them the same way that they stalk. You know how their head is like locked, and only their lower body moves, and they're like coming at you, and their eyes and their head just don't even shift, but their lower body just works underneath their head. So that's what I did. I stood up, and then I crouched lower, and I locked eyes on the mountain lion, and I just didn't move my head. I just started walking towards it with my lower body. And it looked at me, and it turned to the side, and I swear I remember seeing its Adam's apple. I don't even know if mountain lions have Adam's apple, but it looked like it swallowed, and it turned to the left, and slowly, keeping its right eye on me, slinked off into the brush. Now, I wouldn't suggest anybody else. It worked for me one time. It may not work again, but anyway, it worked perfectly. He's like, no, this ain't prey. This thing's coming at me. I'm leaving. So I just thought that was a really interesting encounter. Could have gone a different way, but so anyway. More stuff that went on down there. Okay, so the more time I spent down there, the more I started looking at these broken trees. And then I started realizing I'm seeing broken trees that had been broken off, the tops broken off, and had regrown. So this had been going on for decades. Like, I'm fully convinced now this is an area that these things have been inhabited for a long time. And it's a beautiful place to inhabit. So, but I had some more confirmation down the road. So I'm looking at, you know, twist-offs and tracks and all that. I did find some excrement that it totally looked like there were two 18-inch padded feet that had straddled this pile of excrement. And it didn't look like bear excrement. It looked like human excrement, but it was a huge pile. Just the way it comes out of the intestines and coils into a pile. But anyway, I collected some of that. I never turned it in. I carried it around. When I got back, I worked in the IT department. I carried it around the IT department, and I got some pretty interesting reactions. I could hear people in the cubicles, there's the guy who looks for Bigfoot, you know. It was pretty interesting in the workplace. But anyway, so I had that excrement, never had it tested. It dried up, and I don't know whatever happened to it. But anyway, I found a tree, an older spruce that had been broken off, and I carried a tape measure with me, of course, for measuring tracks and whatever. And the break was at 14 feet. There is no way. And the top, the green top, was lying right next to the tree, just like all the others. Twisted off and discarded right at the base of the tree. So I'm like, there's no way a bear is getting up there to do anything with the top of this tree without leaving some sign through the branches climbing up. And it was a pristine tree. There was no damage, no nothing, no bends, no broken off anything, all up the side of the tree. I examined that thing for an hour, and I was absolutely convinced that whatever took the top of that tree off reached over and twisted it off with a strong hand and an opposable thumb. So I'm looking around the tree, and, you know, this is hard-packed ground down there by the riverbed, you know, in this big open area along the side of Bluff Creek. And I see a twig that was mashed into the ground. And I see that it's like where a heel was. And then I can see a pretty clear 22-inch impression. Nothing definitive, no nice edges, no toes, just absolute 22-inch heavy impression. Something pressed that twig into the ground of great weight. You know, it was like a 1/4-inch twig. And it was absolutely embedded in that track. So I thought, well, you know, 22-inch track, that'd be about right for something that could reach across at 14 feet, snap the top of this tree off. So that was another thing I found interesting in that area. And like I said, the breaks that look like they'd been going on for decades. But I think it was maybe in the 94 trip or 94 or 95, 96, I don't remember now. But I'm exploring the area up along the side of the Bigfoot Creek that feeds into Bluff Creek. And there's a nice kind of trail that goes up alongside of Bigfoot Creek. But there were branches that had been bent over and crisscrossed to where you had to duck. You couldn't just walk straight up the path. It looked to me like something had done that on purpose. But anyway, not far from there, in the wood line, I found a nest. And it was so obvious as I'm walking through the wood line, I see this green patch that stands out against the browner forest floor. and I go over to it, and it's got all these like spruce or whatever green break-off branches all laid out in about an 8-foot circle. And I looked around, and there's no trees near this circle that these could just fall off and end up lying here. Something placed these here. And it absolutely, and I've seen now nests on, Expedition Bigfoot. And I'm convinced it was a nest. And it was right there at Bigfoot Creek, right where all the tree breaks were, right where, I'm finding all this stuff down there. And so.
Do you have pictures of any of that at all?
I'm pretty sure I took pictures of that nest, but, like I said, I got out of Bigfoot. I was in a difficult relationship in the middle of all this, and it started, coming to a head in the late 90s, and I got really distracted. It affected my work and, all kinds of stuff. And so I kind of got away from it, and I had these pictures developed, and I had a shoebox of any of the stuff that I had found, and the way I looked at it is it really isn't convincing. I could lay out a bunch of limbs in an 8-foot circle and take a picture of it. Look, I found a nest. So to me, it wasn't that big of a deal. So if it was a big deal to me, I would have hung on to it and showed it to everybody. But, it wasn't a big deal. I've always been about getting real evidence, real proof, real encounters. That's, the field work. That's always been my goal, not collecting, photos and stuff like that. Now I wish I would have saved those. But anyway, so, and like I said, I never saw any bear down there the whole time. All the time I spent down there looking around, and I saw bear everywhere else. I have walked up to within 10 feet of bear accidentally when they're on the other side of a bush. I come up so quietly, they didn't even know I was there, and I didn't know they were there. One time I sat down with my backpack, and I'm looking, and I hear something behind me, and I look through the bushes, and I see this furry arm, like reaches, and I'm like, oh my, what the? and I got a better look, and it was a bear. Wow. I forget what it was doing with its arm, but it was actually two bear, and they were about 20 feet away from me. I quietly picked up my backpack and kept walking up the road. But I've walked up on bear in the middle of the night. I mean, like, I look back now and I'm like, I had too much confidence in that throw net and K-bar knife.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I have come up on cubs too.
Oh boy.
And yeah, walking down a logging road, and I hear this scraping sound like on tree bark, and I'm like, what is that? And I turn to my left, and I see a cub scurrying up a tree. I'm like, oh, I need to get out of here. I don't know where Mama is.
You found some caves on Onion Mountain as well?
So in '95, I bought a KLX 650, and through the backpack on the back of the KLX, or through my gear, I actually had pouches and stuff, and headed up there, and which was just really nice. All the roads I had hiked, I was now cruising at, 25 miles an hour on a KLX 650, and so I started exploring, and I'm following this road up, and I've come to find out that Onion Mountain and Blue Creek Mountain Blue Creek Mountain, just on the other side of that, is famous hotspot, and I've even heard talk of caves over there. And there's even a videos on YouTube about Blue Creek Mountain Bigfoot. So anyway, I take my KLX and I go up and I find myself on Onion Mountain, and the road leads me to this giant rock quarry. And I'm like, a rock quarry on the top of this mountain. They absolutely destroyed the top of this high ground and turned it into a giant rock quarry. I sent you pictures. And there was a big platform in the middle of it, like where they put some heavy-duty equipment, like probably rock crusher or whatever. And then, the rock quarry didn't, mean too much to me at that point, because I know they've got to, when they're building logging roads, they got to lay down base and stuff. And what better way to put the quarry right at the top of the mountain and drive it down the mountain to do the roads. And but I started exploring around, and there's this trail that leads out of the rock quarry, and I follow it down, and I come to this giant pile, odd-looking pile of giant boulders that do not look naturally formed. They look like they exploded. They were jagged-edged. It totally looked like a cave entrance that had been demolished, and it had just fallen down and covered the entrance like it was dynamited. And it was about 40 foot wide, I think. I've got it in that picture. 40 foot wide entrance. And so I'm like, this doesn't look right. This totally looks like it was blasted. And so I'm exploring, trying to get down into the rocks, and I realize there's cold air coming out from these rocks, really cold air. And I think it was in August when I was there, and there was a patch of snow at the entrance to this cave, or where this pile of boulders were. I mean, August, and there's still a little patch of snow there because the air coming out was cold enough that it hadn't melted. So I'm like, that's totally going into the earth. That's going in. And so I'm convinced now. I think that they blasted and created that rock quarry to destroy caves at the top of Onion Mountain, because they didn't, the whole logging industry did not want people coming out there and saving the Bigfoots from the logging industry. So they got to blast the cave shut, lock these animals in there, keep them away, do whatever. And so that's my theory, is that they created this rock quarry there, dual purpose. One, they needed the rock, and two, they sealed up those cave entrances. So this is my theory. So I ride back to Orleans, to the ranger station, and I walk up to the counter of the ranger station, and there's a female ranger kind of catty corner back left at a desk. And, hi, how you doing? I just had a couple of questions. You ever heard anything about, any caves back there in Bluff Creek? And she said, yeah. I said, oh, really? I said, do you know if they were blasted shut? She said, yeah, they were blasted shut. I said, do you know why? She said, no, I have no idea. Do you know when? I mean, I don't remember the conversation exactly, but this is what I got from it. She didn't know why. She knew they had existed, and she knew they had been blasted shut. And I asked her, do you know when about this happened? And she said, maybe 10 years or so ago. As soon as she said 10 years, it rang a bell with what the Bluff Creek company owner said to me. He hadn't heard them come through his property in about 10 years.
Oh,
So,
wow. Yeah.
so she confirmed that there were caves up there. Now, I've had a conversation online with a fairly well-known bookstore owner that I don't need to mention, but he swears there's no way there's caves up there. And he even brought a geologist online and said, no, that's not suitable for caves. Now, I sent you an image proving the type of geology that is there. It is exactly what caves come from. I don't know. Did you get those pictures yet?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
looking at
but
them.
anyway, yeah. So absolutely, it looks like the explosion, the lava tubes, the whatever comes up from the inner earth would come out the tops and sides of these mountains and form these caves. And so I absolutely think, and I have another picture that I didn't take good notes, but I think it's the entrance of a smaller cave. I didn't even send it to you because it really doesn't, you can't tell much from it. I'm pretty sure that's why I took it. But I think anybody that spent, a fair amount of time up there could find more. And I'm sure they don't want people going up there exploring around and making some discoveries. But I still think that whole corridor right there, because let me move forward because I'm taking up a lot of time. So it was late 70s or early 80s cave destruction is kind of from what I gathered. So anyway, fast forward, Matt Moneymaker and I went up there, I think in 96 and hung out. We're sitting around the campfire. He said, "Hey, you want to do a TV show?" I said, no. I said, no, I'm not. I'm not sure if this is exactly what I said, but I know this is what is in my mind. I don't want to run around at the behest of, some directors and executive producers, with a camera on me while I'm, running around the woods. No, I'm not really interested in doing a TV show. I want to get the evidence. And I think this valley is where it can be gotten. And so, no, I turned down his TV offer. Lauren Coleman contacted me and asked me if he could put my story in his book. And I really didn't want, this is like I said, this is the first time I've even considered an interview or doing anything really in public. But anyway, Lauren Coleman asked if he could put it in the book. I said, no, I'm not really interested. And he was like, oh, okay. So on a subsequent trip up there, on a KLX 650, I'm in town, and at one point I had rented out a storage area to keep my gear up there in Willow Creek. So I'm looking at a map, and I'm doing a map recon, and for some reason Nickowitz Peak speaks to me. And I'm like, I want to go there. That's interesting. The terrain, where it is, its relationship to Bluff Creek, all that. So I head up there on my KLX, and I get to the base of Nickowitz Peak, the road that climbs up. There was like a little intersection there. And I look up, and I see, I forget, 30 yards up the road, I see that the trees from the sides of the road, these logging roads that they put in, when they cut stuff down to make the road, the naturally growing pines and spruce start regrowing, on like 5 to 10 foot swaths on either side of the logging road. And so on the sides of the logging road going up to Nickowitz Peak, the trees were all green, healthy, fairly tight together, like they had just grown, on their own natural pattern. And they were all about 3, 4, maybe 5 at the biggest inches in diameter at the base. And I looked up the logging road. I'm thinking I'm going to ride my motorcycle right up to the top of Nickowitz Peak, but there's no way. There are trees pulled from either side, cross-hatched for about 100 yards up the road. I'm like, what in the heck? So I'm like, my first thought is no one is going to spend their time pulling these trees over. First of all, you'd need a pickup truck or a big four-wheeler with a chain and hook to pull these trees over. And I mean, I just didn't see any way. And so I looked at the bark on all these trees, and there was nothing wrong with the bark. There was no damage. There was no chain marks, no teeth marks. It was though something with a big padded hand had gripped these trees and just pushed, pulled, or whatever them over in a cross-hatch pattern for about 100 yards. So I had to park my motorcycle, which I wasn't real comfortable doing, at the bottom of Nickowitz Peak. And I had to jungle gym over these trees to get up the road. And I know I didn't take a picture. I don't think I took a picture of that. I so wish I did. That would be one of the best pictures I wish I had now. But I only share this, because, anybody who goes out there looking, you can find some really astonishing things. And so the only thing I could come up with that had the power to pull these 3-4 inch trees over in a pattern, one to the left, then one to the right, then one to the left, then one to the right. It was like definitely did not want anybody coming up that road. And if you did, you were going to make a lot of noise with a chainsaw before you could even start going up. So I parked my bike and I jungle gymmed over the trees and got to some clear logging road and then walked up to the top. Now, I don't know if it was my mind that was, playing with me, because I already had the feeling that they were up here and they didn't want anybody coming up here. So that was already on my mind. But while I was up there, I was like, I really felt uncomfortable. The most uncomfortable I had ever felt. And it was a really interesting place. The forest floor was like nice pine needles, and it was open, and it was, it was beautiful, different than anything I'd seen. And I thought, what a great place to live if you're living in the woods. I mean, this is where I would camp. And so anyway, I didn't see anything. I was up there a couple hours, pretty uncomfortable the whole time. I left. Thank goodness my bike was fine, not messed with, and left. But those trees still, to this day, amazing. And I did find something like it up in Washington on a trail. At the trail entrance at the logging road, there was a broken off treetop, same exact pattern. It was almost, and it was the hanging tree part was pointing in towards the trail. It was like a marker. In my opinion, I think they're markers. I think they're territorial. This is me. This is how big I am. This is my territory. Whatever. I think it was odd that I never saw a bear down there by Bluff Creek, and I'd seen them everywhere else in all of my travels around there, but never down there. I think the bears stay away from them. I just don't think that they maybe live well together. Just, a theory. But anyway, So, yeah, I forget where I was going with that.
So did you then go up into Oregon and Washington and do some things up there as well?
Yeah, I did. So I sent you some pictures. So I got a nice paying job overseas, and I came back with, after 3 years, a nice chunk of change, and bought a 4x4 van, and fitted it with 4 computer workstations, audio, video. I had 360-degree night vision cameras on the roof, along with a parabolic dish, and speakers and large speakers to call blast. And so I went up there, and I ended up getting a wolf dog that, for all intents and purposes, grew up to be a wolf. Genetically and behaviorally, he was indistinguishable from a wolf. He passed away a couple of years ago, but absolutely amazing animal. And I am 100% against people mixing wolf dogs and selling them. This guy was innately wild. And I could talk to you, it's a whole nother subject about genetic memory. This guy had the genetic memory of a wolf, and he triggered on certain things. He already knew certain animals. He knew the difference between horses and elk. I mean, I could go on and on. But anyway, he disrupted my whole last hurrah at Bigfoot hunting, because I had the whole 9 yards. I had this van completely. I had a 30-foot custom trailer built for living in the backcountry. But anyway, yeah. So I went up there. We did do a little expedition there. I heard from the locals there's a river that led down to the ocean that the Bigfoot used as a corridor to go from the mountains down to the ocean. And we camped out there, and we got a whoop going around our campsite. Sounded like pretty genuine to me. But anyway, so then I went down to the Southern Olympic Peninsula, and so I built a custom cage in the back of my 4x4 for the wolf. I also had a white German Shepherd at the time. She helped raise. Zorro was his name. And so I'm in the hardware store, and I'm buying a bale of straw to line the back of the cage in the back of the van with. And the young guy that's helping me with the bale of straw, so I said, so you ever hear anything about Bigfoots around here? So I'm at the southern end of the Olympic Peninsula. Right now is, I think, exactly where they're doing Expedition Bigfoot. Right at that fork where it goes right and left.
I've been trying to figure that out too.
Yeah, I think I know exactly where they are.
Yeah.
And I think if I looked at a map, I could figure out by the valleys and everything when they show the map. But anyway, so I asked him, I said, you ever heard? He said, oh, yeah. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, back in high school, we used to go out on the weekends up by the dam and listen to them scream to each other. I'm like, are you serious? He said, yeah. I said, where's this dam? So he told me where the dam was. I went back up to the north end of the peninsula, got 3 guys together, a couple of just local guys and one ex-cop, and brought them down, and the mission was the dam. So we go to the dam, and there's a nice place to camp down at the bottom. It's I think it was about 100 yards from the river that comes down out of the mountains. And then there's a steep climb up to the dam. And the 2 local guys, me and the cop, stayed by the campfire. Zorro, I had to drive a 3-foot steel stake into the ground with a chain on it to keep him at the campsite. I mean, I got him to be a companion in the wilderness, but there's no way I could responsibly let him off leash. I mean, his instincts and his drive was way too much. If you're cooking out like a couple 100 yards away, cooking hamburger, he gets a whiff of it, and your little 4-year-old's running around the campfire, he'd take her down. So anyway, that's why I'm against animals being bred like that.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
Wow.
so I got Zorro staked to the ground, and me and the ex-law enforcement police officer are there, and I send the two other guys up the mountain with radios, and we got radios at base camp. And I mean, I had all kinds of, I had thermal, and it was sitting on a pivoting head. It would swivel back and forth, and we were watching the monitors for any thermal up on the hillside. You know, I had the whole setup. Didn't have the bionic ear set up yet. And actually, I think I don't even have had the thermal yet. I might have put that up later. But anyway, me and the ex-cop are standing by the fire, and the two locals, I'd shown them tree breaks and stuff, and so they were all briefed on what to look for. And they're climbing up the mountain. You know how quiet it is in the woods in the middle of the night, so far away from civilization. We could hear those guys crashing through the brush going up the side of the mountain. Me and the cop just kind of laughed. And so I get a radio call. He says, Rory, he says, we're finding tree breaks up here. And I was like, all right, okay. I think we're in the territory. And so at some point, shortly thereafter, we hear this scream. And the best way I could describe it is a war cry. It's not a scream. It's not a howl. It's like a war cry. And it was powerful. And it was up the valley from us. It was a ways off. But it was so clear and powerful. The cop and I just look at each other with saucer-sized eyes. And so that first war cry ends, and then we hear another war cry a little bit closer. And we're looking out, you know, to the woods, and then it stops, and then we heard a third war cry, and it's even closer. So these things are lined up down the valley, one after the other in succession, is telling us, you guys need to leave. And so the third one finishes its war cry, and then we hear a fourth one, and it's like right across the river from us. And I said to the cop, I said, I mean, we were just absolutely amazed. That would have made some of the best audio, and I didn't have the parabolic and the recorder set up yet. It was still just barely going dark. It wasn't even dark. I mean, I'm not expecting anything to happen till after dark. And so you know, people say that, oh, those are elk calls or whatever. I've heard elk, and this is an unmistakably different thing. And I said to the cop, I said, and he's an elk hunter all his life, Washington State, ex-cop, firearms, the whole 9 yards. I said, does that sound like an elk to you? He said, no way. So anyway, the guys, they heard these screams, and they were scared to death. Because now after the screams, it was getting really dark, and they had to stay there the whole night. And it was dark. I don't remember what they did for camp. I don't think they did a campfire. I think they just stayed up all night and were afraid for their lives.
Was that around Lake Cushman?
You know, I don't remember the lake, and if I did a map recon right now, I'm sure I could find I think it was north of Aberdeen.
Okay. Gotcha.
But don't quote me on that, because I haven't really paid a whole lot of attention to it.
Gotcha.
You know, I haven't looked it up to narrow down exactly where it was. But there's a dam, and I think it's Aberdeen. But I mean, I could look it up tomorrow, and you know. But anyway, it was the interesting succession of war cries that it was sending a message first one's way back, next one's closer, and the next one's like right across the river from us. It was a definite show of force. And I'm sure they heard us, the noise, and the guys climbing up into the woods, maybe into their territory. But anyway, it was fascinating stuff at the time. And then there was, okay, gosh, this is like some of the best stuff right here. Patrick Creek.
Okay.
Are we good?
What? No, we're good. This is a new place for me. I'm excited.
Okay. Well, I sent you a map. Patrick Creek is north of Bluff Creek.
Okay.
And Patrick Creek is a little area. It's, I'm sure there's probably a creek in there named that. But anyway, Matt Moneymaker gets contact from an active law enforcement officer up in those neck of the woods. And the guy, the law enforcement officer, communicates to Matt. He says, I think I got two of them on my property. He had a little hippie cabin out in the wilderness that he would like go hang out at on weekends or whatever. And he said, I think I got a couple of them around my property because I hear these crazy screams back and forth between these two, whatever they are. So Matt, I'm working, developing software in Southern California there, and Matt contacts me and he says, Rory, he says, I think I got a hotspot. And so he describes it to me, and I didn't even interview the guy. Matt says it's good. I said, okay, give me about a week. Got stuff together, let everybody know. I was a contractor, so I could, kind of come and go. And went up a week or two or whatever later. And so on my way by, Matt said, stop by my house and pick up a CD. And I've got, his recordings, I think he made in Ohio. He said he's cleaning them up for me and putting them on a CD so that we can blast them out from the hippie cabin up there on the property. And I said, cool. So I stopped by his house, and he didn't have it ready yet. So I just kept going and got up there and met up with the law enforcement officer. In the mail, he received a CD from Matt. I go into town, buy a CD player. He digs up some kind of giant speaker from somewhere. We go out to his hippie cabin. We get it all set up in the living room of this, hippie cabin, and it was kind of a cool big bay window, like two barn door kind of window things that opened out, overlooking the valley. And this was really heavily forested. You really couldn't see anything, but it opened out, and it was just air. I mean, there was no screen, there was no glass, they just opened, and there it is. And it overlooked a little dirt road that, ran up and by the cabin. And so we get everything set up, and it's me and the law enforcement guy and his significant other. And I forget what time we started. I don't know, 9 or 10-ish, dark. And we blasted out a call, Matt's howl. And it sounded pretty good. And so we waited, maybe 15 minutes or so. We blasted it out again. And we waited. We got the light on in the cabin, and we're just, standing around talking Bigfoot stuff or whatever. And I don't know, maybe the third or fourth time we're standing there talking, and we hear this whistle right in front of the cabin. And this is not a bird. The power behind the whistle, you immediately know this is coming from a healthy set of lips and lungs. And I spent a ton of time in the wilderness and never heard anything like this. And so I immediately knew what it was because, you know, Bigfoots they're called whistlers in some places. You see them on totem poles, their lips are puckered like they're whistling. And I immediately thought I knew what it was, and I turned towards the other two and I said, "That's a squatch." And then the lady said, "Turn out the lights." So we turned out the lights, and then we listened, and nothing more. I mean, I forget how much time went by, but, you know, nothing more happened. So I'm convinced that that was a squatch, that we got to come to the cabin. It, you know, my guess is it thought there was a squatch in that cabin, and it was calling to it. "Hey, I'm out here. You in there?" And so the next morning, they leave early. I mean, he's working every day on the coast, and it's at least an hour, I think it was, from the hippie cabin to the coast. You know, this is in the area of Patrick Creek up there. And so he leaves really early the next morning. And the next morning, I think it was the next morning. Anyway, I go out to my car. He's gone. I got to get batteries or something, and it's still pitch black. I mean, it's really early. And I open my car door, and I'm bathed by the interior light. And when I open the door, I hear behind me, and this is the exact whistle. They used the same whistle the whole time I was there. It was, and so when I opened the door, it sounds like it's like 20 feet behind me. I hear this whistle, and I slowly turn around, and the only thing I could think to do was answer it with a whistle. So I whistled back to it, and then it whistled back to me. And then I whistled back to it, and it whistled back to me. And then I whistled back to it, and I think that was it. I don't think it answered me after that. But I never heard a sound. And this was not a bird. I mean, this was a more powerful whistle than a bird. So I get my gear, and I go back to the cabin. He shows up that evening. Oh, that day, I dig a foxhole while he's at work. And it's kind of catty corner across from the cabin, and what I thought was a good position for me to spring out of the foxhole with a camera if one of them was going to come by the cabin again. It was just a perfect shot down the logging road next to the cabin to get it on film. And at the time, back in 96, I had a Sony High 8 with, you know, the latest and greatest night vision screw-on monocular that you could put on the front of a Sony, an ITT Gen whatever. And I thought I was, you know, pretty set. And I put tape over the LED on the camera so when it was on, you couldn't see, you know, a little light or anything. And so I digged this foxhole, and it wasn't real deep. And I made a little seat so I could just sit down. And basically my eyes were just at ground level. And I, you know, I wrote this up for the BFRO too, the stories on there. But I just sat there, you know, and in the military, you know that movement will give your position away. I mean, people can be looking straight at you, and if you don't move, there's a good chance they don't even see you. So I didn't move. And a fox, and I know people think I'm probably making this up, but, you know, I don't make any of this stuff up, just the way it happens. But a fox comes walking by my foxhole on the logging road, and there's only like 5 feet in front of my eyeballs. And it just walks by, didn't even know I was there, and just walked right on by me. So I thought, wow, I'm, you know, doing pretty good. So, and, you know, that's that night. And I had kind of briefed the Leo, law enforcement officer. I briefed the Leo, hey, I got I dug a foxhole today. If you can blast out, the sounds from the cabin like we did, last night, we can get it to run by. I got my camera, and this time I had a 357 on me. And so I was kind of comfortable in the foxhole. So he says, sure. So he says, I'll do it from the second floor. So he goes up to the second floor, which is the bedroom, and he opens the window, and he blasts out a call. And then I think, 15 minutes later, he blasts out another call. And then I hear him snoring. So, how quiet it is in the woods. My gosh, it sounded like he was right next to me. So, the poor guy, he's working his butt off at work in his day job, getting up early and coming out and staying up late at night. So he fell asleep. But we got a couple of calls out. So I thought, well, I'm just going to sit here. It may take him a while to get here. So I'm sitting there, and I hear this crazy whistle. I can't even, I used to be able to mimic it a little bit, just really crazy and powerful and clear and clean, running up to the front of the cabin. It was like a last-ditch effort to not put itself in jeopardy, but it still wanted to communicate into that cabin. And so when I heard this crazy whistle and it's coming towards me by the cabin, I think to myself, this is it. This is the money shot. I raised the Sony out of my lap and lift it above the edge of the foxhole and lean a little bit towards the road, because there was this little tiny scraggly shrub thing next to the foxhole, and I had to just get around to the side of it. And just as I made that, all in one motion move, I hear a whistle directly across the logging road from me. And it was a short, brief, powerful whistle. And then the other whistle that was going by the cabin stopped, and it went dead quiet. And I'm thinking to myself, whatever made that whistle is like right across the logging road from me. It's like, how did it even get there without me knowing? And, but I heard it. It was so close. And, but it warned the other one. It was watching me the whole time. And so what I've later come to realize is my theory is that when these animals come, they'll do a 360 around you to get the lay of the land and figure out where everybody is and before they do anything. And so what I think they did is they did the 360 around, saw me in the foxhole. He set himself right across from me and was watching every move I made. And when I raised that camera, he blurted out a powerful whistle, which shut the other one down. It all went quiet. And I thought I saw, nocturnal eyes at different times for the rest of the night in different positions. But that was pretty much all. That was it for the night. So the next day, it's really cold. I think this was in October. It's going to be a really cold night. So he goes to work. He comes home. I say, tonight I'm going to sit on the porch with my camera, because now they know where the foxhole is. They saw me sitting in it last night. That gig's up. So I sit on the deck right by the door, with the door cracked, and they had a fire, I'm pretty sure, going in a wood stove inside. And I was hoping I would get a little bit of heat coming through the crack of the door, but that wasn't happening. I was out there freezing my butt off. And so I got the camera in my lap again, and he blasts out the calls, and I'm sitting on the porch, and I think after about an hour, I hear off in the far distance, I don't know, I'm just going to throw out a few hundred yards. just as a number. But I could hear this, and then another. There were two different tones, which at the end of this night, I thought one was a male and the other was a female. And so I listened to these whistles, much like in the military when you're on patrol and you signal back and forth so you know that you guys are still together and what your position is. These guys were doing the same thing. It sounded like they were about 50 yards apart. And I could hear the whistles getting closer and closer. I'm like, well, this is really strange. It's like they're telling me they're coming. I mean, why would they telegraph their movement towards the cabin like this? I know exactly where they are, and they're getting closer. They're coming in from right over there. And so they got up to pretty close to the cabin. I don't know, maybe 50 yards, and then the whistling stopped. I was hearing it like every few minutes as they were coming up to the cabin. Now I didn't hear it for like a half an hour. It was just quiet, but I knew they got close. So what I think they were doing is they got close to the cabin and then they did their 360 to figure out, what's going on here. And they saw me up on the deck sitting there. And as I'm sitting there, I hear what sounds like a cow walking through the trees. I mean, huge, not concerned with noise whatsoever, walking through the trees from the right, which is where the whistles had ended, and walking along the side of the logging road in the bushes and trees. I could hear it as clear as day. I swear it sounded like a cow. And it walked up, and then it stopped right across the logging road from me. And I can't see nothing. And, I didn't really want to raise the camera unless it was a really good reason, because the last time it just shut everything down. So I'm sitting there squinting and trying to see and listen. But whatever was coming through the woods stopped. And then I realized it stopped right behind my foxhole. So it walked up through the woods, made a lot of noise, and stopped right at my foxhole, and now had a perfectly clear view of me sitting on the porch. I thought, what a twist. What a turn of the table. So, this is what leads me to believe there's some game playing, the intelligence, the tactics. They're open to, a little, mixing it up a little if they believe that you're not a threat to them. And so then I didn't hear any more after that. I did record the whistles as they were coming. I turned the camera on in my lap so it could just record the audio. But, it doesn't mean anything. I played it for people when I got back to California. They're like, yeah, that's interesting. But anyway, so I just thought that was a really interesting encounter. So it ended up spanning 3, I think maybe 4 nights of activity. But the same whistle I ended up using to train my shepherd. I had a shepherd too, which I thought was a little sadistic. If we're ever out in the woods and a Sasquatch whistles, it'll go running towards them. But anyway,
that's kind of weird. Do you have like any audio or video archives from that time?
No, I did have the camera on when I raised up out of the foxhole at the front of the cabin. And, I looked at it and I didn't see anything. A neighbor across the street was like, "Oh my gosh, let me look at it. Let me do some analysis on it." And he looked at it, and it was the old reel, high 8 tape, and he looked at it. He said, I think I see something right here. And I looked at it and was like, "No, I don't think that's anything. I think that might be that little twig tree, like getting brushed or something," as I raised the camera. But anyway, I don't keep stuff. The main reason I share this is for people who want to go out and experience, be open. And if you see or hear these kinds of things, it may warrant some further research, because you might be, in a spot. But like I don't even think I got to that one trail up in Washington. There were 2 trees on either side of the trail, opposite of each other. They were about 5 inches in diameter, and it was though something had walked up that trail and grabbed the 2 trees at whatever height above the ground and then just pushed them over. These are absolutely, completely healthy trees. When they were broken over, it was white. It was a white break. The inner part of the tree was just all white. It was a growing, healthy tree. But something pushed both of them over the same way. And it looked as though someone walked up that trail and just pushed them over and kept going. I mean, it's that kind of strange stuff you see. And there's no marks on the trees. There's no chain marks. There's nothing to give anything away of something pulling it over. And, you talk about trees that get broken over with, some of the locals, they, it's probably snow damage. No way. In the places that these trees are and the surrounding trees around them, there's no way that these individual trees get singled out from snow.
And that was in Washington, you said?
Yeah, that one was in Washington. The Olympic Peninsula is just a great place. That's where I was going to do all my research with the custom trailer and 4x4 van, I was really geared. I thought, I'm going to be the one who's going to get the encounter. I'm going to get them to come up around my trailer. It had like 16 cameras all around the perimeter of the roof. If I could get them to come to me. So anyway, but then I got Zorro, and my whole life was consumed by him. He was a 24/7 animal. And you can see on my X page, my Twitter file, I talk a little bit about, raising him. And, there are people out there that have kind of wolfy looking dogs, and they'll tell you, yeah, he's really wolfy, but, they're dogs. We have a low content wolf dog right now that we rescued. She looks pretty wolfy. I could take a picture of her and put her on social media and say, this is darn near a pure wolf, and people would believe it all day long. When in fact, she doesn't have the DNA. She doesn't have the genetics. She's just got the look-alike. And she's the doggiest dog you will ever meet. But Zorro was a whole different animal. My wife wouldn't be in the room alone with him. For the years that we've been together and Zorro was with us, she would not be in the room alone with him.
Wow.
And if she fell down outside, thank goodness he was in an enclosure, because he would have been on her.
Oh my goodness.
To fall down in front of an animal like that, it triggers an instinct, a display of weakness. It's time to pounce. And she'd go out and feed the chickens and fall down, and he'd cover about 30 feet in a second and be right up to the fence, teeth bared. It's a different animal. Of course, with me, of course, I call it Stockholm syndrome. I'm the captor, he's the prisoner.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, but anyway, I think I've covered, pretty much everything. I hope, people find some of this stuff interesting.
Rory, it is extremely interesting. Is there a way that there's going to be some guys I know that are going to listen to this and they are going to have questions about potential questions about like the caves on Onion Mountain and stuff. Is there a way that people can reach out to you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. You can give them my email.
Okay, gotcha. Yep. Okay. So the one that you sent the photos
and
from. Yeah.
I think, yeah. And like the caves up on Onion Mountain, I could have spent a lot of time up there, but I didn't. I found what I found, and I found what looked to me that blasted cave entrance, and I spent, the day there exploring that, and I was convinced that was a cave entrance.
Right.
And it was blasted shut, and I went down to Orleans, confirmed it with a ranger at the ranger station, and that was it. That was good for me. But who knows? Somebody can go up there and find some open caves that are just, off the beaten path. And they may find that they're still being occupied from time to time. That Bluff Creek Valley, I'm convinced that has been inhabited for centuries. And they go in and out of it and, stay or whatever. But I'm convinced if you wanted to find a place, I would give that a pretty good shot. Now, but, it's been quite a while since I've been up there. Maybe it's completely dry, But those guys on Expedition Bigfoot, they seem like they're in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good guys out there right now. But Rory, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for sharing what you experienced over the years on my show. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure that my listeners appreciate it as well. Thank you for coming on.
Okay, thanks for having me, Jeremiah. Have a good night.
You got it, sir. Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKenzie Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS. And it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.